Kia ora everybody, and welcome to Future Whenua Yarns for Posterity.
We haven't quite settled on a tagline yet, so we're trying a few out. So yeah, if anyone wants to decide on a really favourable one that they really like, then let us know, because it's unlikely to stay the same for very long.
Yeah, we can keep going.
Obviously, so episode 3, Rob here, Zeb sitting next to me, and we're really, I think we're going to top the charts any day now. Joe Rogan's in real trouble.
For sure. But first up, we've got Lisa Warbrick, member of the Maori Agribusiness Collective, a really cool initiative in the North Island. And she spoke at Future Whenua Summit, so there were a couple who were unable to make it in person. So instead we just got a quick 5-minute intro into their work and what they're up to. And we're going to piece that together, that presentation with this, and then lead into the conversation that we just had recently with Lisa. So looking forward to sort of piecing all those together. But yeah, so the Maori Agribusiness Collective is one of the hats that Lisa wears, and it's pretty cool just gathering like-minded groups together to, so they can work together and grow faster. And another is really exploring this, local small-scale meat production and processing, which I think is really important.
Yeah, huge. I mean, food has never been a bigger issue on people's minds at the moment, with food prices going up and food security really starting to become a mainstay part of the conversation. So I think it'll be interesting over the next couple of years to see sort of who was an early adopter in that space. Lisa and her group, the guidance down south, all these people, and really sort of see how they're going to go from strength to strength as people become much more aware of that insecurity of current food models and food systems. And it was a really cool thread that I got into with Joel Salatin, but Lisa's doing this mahi here in Aotearoa, so real good to have leaders there. And yeah, we also just talked a little bit about some Māori concepts, and when I think about Kiwi culture and what differentiates us, so many of the things like, kia ora bro, it's so many of these Māoridoms is what defines us as a culture, and yet there's still racial tensions, and that's within the agri sector. It's sort of come with this 3 waters of notice and hearing. That's a big part of the contentious debate is this co-governance on that, and it's just, I think it's nice to actually ground in some of the Maori concepts to bring us there, and that's a big part of our name, Future Whenua. I think we can get into that with Lisa, but there's just some concepts of why I think it's important to talk about this. Te Aotearoa, it's, this is talking about the natural order of things. It's this interconnectedness and mutual dependency between so we can narrow in on a single thing, the reductionist model of science. But in a more indigenous mindset, it's this huge big picture, and not just indigenous, but also on the quantum level in some of the leading science. Well, it's very much in line with permaculture principles, where it's systems thinking as opposed to individual unit thinking, where you're looking at an ecosystem as a whole and watching the various interaction and interplays, as opposed to just going, I want to grow beans, why aren't my beans growing fast enough? And going, okay, well, I need more NPK or whatever it happens to be to make the beans grow faster. It's about that holistic understanding of the system and why it is, as one individual element within it, your beans might not be doing well.
Very much so. Yeah. And it's fractal as well, like how this whole is, and there's, if we can't just ignore, if we're talking about the whole, we can't ignore where did that phosphorus come from, and Barnaba, this sinking island that we just trashed before. Well, it's harder to ignore the externalities. And it's also on this other level, something that Zach Bush said that I thought was one of the most powerful parts of his presentation was, we're not just here to talk about nutritious cabbages, we're talking about building this field around what it is to be a steward of the land. It's like this morphic resonance thing.
Well, it comes back, it's part of the wider discussion we're always having around this idea of innovations versus iteration. And I think that's the problem, is that we've just iterated forwards on a whole bunch of sort of core assumptions. And now it's suddenly that rediscovery that indigenous knowledge, that sort of
what would you say, experiential learning of a people who've been in a land for such a long period of time that they understand the interplay between all the elements that are there. You know, the idea that the Inuit have 30 different words for snow, the Amazonians have, you know, a much more complex linguistic sort of structure around these natural systems because they're part of them, they're living in them. So they need that nuance to be able to describe these different interplays. And yet we go, it's raining, or it's windy, or, you know, the leaves are falling from the tree, it must be autumn, and they're looking at it on a much, you know, it's checkers versus chess kind of thinking. So, yeah, I think, you know, I struggle with some of it, and I will admit, because science is amazing at doing certain things, and we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but it's also that thing of science now broadening out its understanding to see that there are, you know, core threads of truth woven through Indigenous knowledge that are irrefutable. Yeah. And it's this really interesting moment where you've got this sort of battle of these two worlds. As, you know, what it appears from the outside is almost like a supremacy thing. It's who's going to come out on top. Whereas to me, it's much more about how do they best integrate.
And I think that's where we're heading for sure, is this integration.
Yeah.
And yeah, for sure. I know Lisa and the collective, they're working on the science base as well, and also taking these concepts. So yeah, cool that the work's getting out there, and there's a pretty dive in there. So let's get to it. Lisa Warbrick.
Kia ora tātou. E kui mā, e kuru mā, e raurangatira mā. I ngā mana, i ngā reo, i ngā karanga maa, kai te mahi. I ngā pau o tēnei kaupapa, kua tai mai nei i tēnei rā, ki raro i te wairua o tēnei hui, ara o tērā, kai te mahi. He uri noa te ataunua paparangi, noa Ngāti Awa, no Ngāti Rangitii. Hei aha home has been Manawatu for 20 years. Ko Lisa Warbrick aho. Kia ora, everyone. Currently sitting in my whare in Fielding. Hei aha moko of Te Awa Tupua in the upper reaches of Whanganui River. And my papa's bones, I hail from the Bay of Plenty and Te Teko. Thank you, Zeb. Pulling this last minute late video I might add together. But thank you to Zeb for the opportunity and the korero, an introduction to the future whenua kaupapa, which is very cool. The invitation was for me to give a 5-minute korero as to what I do and the hats I wear, given that I can't be with you all in person today. So just briefly, I have a couple of pōtai. One is as the Pauarataki for a national collective of Maori agribusinesses called Te Pū Oranga Whenua. And we're a collective of wahine-led organisations who have a relationship with Papa Tuanuku, simply put. And that can range from rungua, and the work we use in with the use of rungua in our practices, forestry with our ahu whenua trusts, our iwi organisations that sit with aquaculture, farming, horticulture. So a diverse range of operations that all have that relationship with Papa Tuanuku, more broadly with our taiao, with our environment. And so as a collective, we aim to work together to leverage off that common knowledge, that common energy, and doing some very cool work at the moment with ag research in terms of land utilisation, land diversification, and more of the science aspects, I guess, and some of the exciting work that we're doing in terms of genomics, for example. The other port I wear as a member of Te Pū Oranga Whenua, my business partner and I, Tracy Bayliss, have a company called Taki Tour that is investigating the opportunity more broadly to work in or to contribute to the resilience of our communities, both urban and rural, the ability to work with our farming community and to shift or influence the processing and supply of, in this case, our meat products, and distributing in a way that fairly feeds our whānau first. And that is our kaupapa, to be able to feed our whānau first. It's not about exporting, it's about what's happening in our own backyards, in our own communities. And so Taki Toi has been on a journey for the last 18 months, 2 years, just focusing on exploring what that zero waste or circular economy looks like at a regionalised level in the hands of the community or the farmers, and being able to provide affordable product and nutritional product that has required low inputs to be able to deliver to our whānau. It's a really big korero, and one that I could belabour the point on, but I've only got a few minutes and it's really weird talking to myself in a video. So if you are interested, that's just a tip, I guess, of some of the conversations I sit in. That collective of agribusinesses, wahine leadership, community resilience in our food production stories, in particular in the meat sector in terms of process and supply and distribution, being able to feed our whānau first and to be able to redefine what the farming story and contribution is to this shift in localised meat production. There's a lot more to be said. However, I shall leave it there. Thank you so much again, Zeb and team, for the opportunity, and look forward to being able to follow up. If you have an interest in the conversations we sit in, you're welcome to get a hold of us through LinkedIn or through this Future Whenua kaupapa. Again, sadly I can't be there with you all, but I have no doubt it'll be an amazing weekend, and I trust you'll enjoy yourselves. Thank you to friends that I haven't met yet. Kia ora. Bye.
Lisa, very good to be connected with you again. We heard from you at the summit, and it was awesome, but yeah, really just barely a sneak peek into the mahi that you're doing in the wild. So wanted to reconnect and elaborate on some of that. So yeah, firstly, just how are you doing?
Kia ora. Thank you for the invitation, Zeb. And again, apologies I couldn't make the summit, but from all accounts, it went amazing. And I appreciate your intention to keep that energy flowing right after the conference. Too many times we rock in hyper elevated and make some cool connections and then don't get to continue that. So thanks for the invitation to expand a bit more on what we're doing with the several portai or hats that I sit in, the conversations that I sit in. So I don't know how you'd like to roll, but if you have questions or if there are inquiry.
Yeah, heaps of questions. And some of it, if it'd be okay, I'd really like to elaborate on some Māori concepts that you bring up. And maybe start with the one just then, the portai. So just as, you know, I like to wear many hats or juggle many plates. Is portai mean hats, or is it roles?
Yeah. Literally means hats. Many hats we wear, and I guess in that respect, so I can talk to. My mum hails from the Whanganui River, and my dad hails from the east coast of the Bay of Plenty. But home for me for nearly 20 years has been in the Manawatu. So when I korero as wa'ine Māori, it is as Lisa from Ngāti Awa, Ngāti Rangatihi, Te Ati Haunui a Paparangi. Certainly you don't speak on behalf of all Māoridom, right? So just to be clear, this is Lisa Warbrick's whakaaro or thoughts, influenced by the many, at the stage in my life, I've sat in a lot of conversations and formulated my own framework of referencing. So specifically around the agribusiness korero and Te Ao Māori, there's a lot of very cool conversations, and over time, it would be great to sort of weave those synergies with you, Zeb. But for the sake of this conversation, just to, I guess, provide a frame, a reference, I am the Pouarataki, or the lead strategy for a inter-region collective of Maori agribusinesses called Te Pū Oranga Whenua. and that's collective of Maori agribusinesses. And today it's only a small, intimate team, and purposefully so. But they're all led by wahine Māori, these organisations, and it's had an influence on how we've collectively worked together and pulled our strength together. I also sit as a director for the Indigenous Genomics Institute, which is a recently formalised group of Māori who sit in academia, science, certainly, and the environmental work, where we are committed to ensuring that our Māori community are aware of the science and the research that is impacting on our environments from a genomics perspective, which loosely for us as Māori, we could refer to as the science of whakapapa or DNA. Yeah.
Wow. Is there a contrast or a parallel? How does that fit? So when we were thinking of the name for Future Whenua 2 years ago, it was this. It's like this balance of quite contrasting terms. Future being quite modern and aspirational, technological, and whenua very soft. And using te reo was quite intentional because it alludes to this interconnectedness. And when I hear Indigenous genomics, a sort of leading edge type of science, I just like, how do those two mingle together?
That's like, it's a good question. And it's the dichotomy of that question is non-Māori and Māori finding that happy medium. And we could just unpack that as a korero. I shan't here as much as I sit in conversations with some very cool people who are clear about mātauranga and te ao Māori having its own space and energy. And in my experience, be it education, health, and science, we try so hard to meld the two that one gets lost. And it's more often than not, it's Māori. It's Māoridom. It's not Māoridom. It's our own mātauranga, our own knowledge that can be subsumed by these non-Māori spaces and conversations. And it's upfront and relevant for our Te Pū Oranga Whenua Rōpū at the moment, where we have a very cool partnership and collaboration with the Crown Research Institute. And we are working through, how does te ao Māori, what is the te ao Māori view of this piece of work? So, the circular economy, the circular bioeconomy is a big conversation we're having, how digital technology affects and impacts the future of agribusiness. So, there's conversations that no doubt you guys are unpacking at the summit, but how does te ao Māori influence that? And these are literally current conversations we're exploring at the moment. And it's certainly a conversation bigger than Te Pū Oranga Whenua or Lisa Warbrick. But they are, what you've asked is very relevant. I have my own view, and as much as te ao Māori is te ao Māori, there's no, and so what we focus on with the Indigenous genomics is how does that work for whānau, hapu, and iwi. Agribusiness, what are our farming or horticultural or land use options? How does that work for whānau, hapu, and iwi? We sit in a paradigm of te ao Māori.
Awesome.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. And you're right, it's a huge conversation and much bigger than what we're going to have in the next hour. But it is really interesting the overlap or parallels that are found within that dichotomy of Māori and non-Māori or contemporary and ancestral. And I've been studying tikanga Māori at Te Wānanga, and I'm just finding so much resonance between the Māori belief system and what I know about quantum physics, or some of the stuff where I spend my time listening to Bruce Lipton, and so this really leading edge science of what some of the smartest researchers or the people in the labs like trying to uncover the nature of reality through Western science And then it's just like they're just leading back to this story that has been told through generations in Māori, this interconnectedness of everything, the whakapapa. Yeah.
Yeah. So I could give a practical example of, how do Māori and non-Māori paradigms, how can we pull those together closer? The first question I ask, for what purpose? For what purpose do you want to bring the melding of the two together? So there's that. And it's not something I'm answering, but it's always conscious, why? Why do you want to understand and know? Like I get it with the treaty conversation and New Zealand's history being taught in schools. The why of that is to ensure that our people walk together, understanding and creating that kinship, that whakawhanaungatanga. But if I can just wrap it back, there's the inquiry I had was, where are our Māori sitting in science and research? And we have very few sitting in these spaces of knowledge and academic and research. And then it led me to an investigation of the statistics of the achievements of our kids in schools and who is taking up science and, sitting in universities in these science subjects. And there's very few when we consider the significance of the health and well-being of, tangata whenua. When we consider the gene technology impact on our environments, our whenua, papa tuanuku, and our awa, our moana, our water. So then that led to understanding what science is being taught and the type of science and how it's being taught, which has marginalised, I would suspect, our rangatahi, our youth, from engaging in what we know as science lessons or learnings today. The periodic table in social physics and biology and chemistry, the curriculum, and I'd have this debate if anyone's listening to this and wants to have this conversation, the curriculum is wired for a certain type of brain and a certain type of person who has a certain way of learning, right? And yet there's everyday citizen science engagement that our kids are involved in, whether it's eeling, whether it's looking for white baiting, whether it's walking out on the whenua, going to get the rongoa or the Māori natural medicines that we have for an Annie so she can make her balm or her poultice or whatever. There's science happening every day, and yet our kids aren't formalising, I guess, that learning. We kind of step back and ask ourselves, as the Indigenous Genomics Institute, how can we get our kids more involved in these sciences so that they can represent the future needs that we will have as a peoples and as a nations? It brings forth the reverence of Māori knowledge. So it's creating, we're literally, in the practical or the pragmatic, okay, so what are we going to do about it, is creating a curriculum premised on Māori knowledge in a way that Māori understand. That has nothing to do with, well, when I say nothing, that's not correct. That isn't transliterating the periodic table, for example, into a Māori construct of the periodic table. Now, what if we talked about these natural minerals in a way that Māori knowledge understands? And it's there, it's written in the history of our tupuna. But we haven't unpacked those stories or that learning. And then so these are the conversations I sit on, which are really amazing. There's some very cool people. And this particular work, yeah, we've got individuals. Probably shouldn't name names because I haven't asked them anyway. But yeah, that's an example of where Te Ao Māori and the influence of Western sits in conversations that I'm having. Yeah, there is. Being Māori is an energy. Being a Māori woman is an energy. So when we have conversations within Te Pū Oranga Whenua, it always relates back to our families, to our children, to our grandchildren. What are we doing? Why are we planting in pine trees? Get me started on that one. Why are we utilising our beautiful land with pine trees. I won't go down that hole though. It's probably a korero for another time.
Yeah, that's another huge conversation of its own for sure.
Yeah.
And yeah, thank you for elaborating on that dichotomy a little further. We will move on from there to Tipu Oranga Whenua. Could you just tell us a bit more about the kaupapa there and who's involved and what action is it seeing at the moment?
Sure. We were brought together as a collective of Maori agribusinesses, primarily from around in the North Island, by Crown Research Institute, who at the time proposed a way of communicating, which was online Zui. We, as the participating Maori agribusiness influencers, whether we were the CE or the kaitiaki or we were the decision makers at this table, quickly found the process of engaging and having quite meaningful discussion about the state of Māori land and how that engagement with Crown could look. The online Zui wasn't a vehicle that was best serving for the discussion. So we then ended up coming together for a 2-day face-to-face kanohi ki te kanohi, where you get to, like just sit in each other's energies and have some really strong conversations and pick up on nuances that sadly these virtual conversations don't always give. And so out of that collection of participants, we went through a process of forming and storming when we realised that each of us, and most of us hadn't met, there were like 20 odd of us in this room, and we'd been active for quite some time but never met. And I get around quite a bit, right? So it was really interesting that these people were doing some amazing stuff and there wasn't a vehicle to connect us or to share. And so, and then there were experiences that we shared in terms of crowdfunding, having a relationship with researchers or scientists or academics that kind of came and took from us and walked away. So these stories were unpacked, and we understood very quickly that we found benefit in this 2 days of connecting. And so we very quickly landed on the potential of formalising to be able to continue these discussions, to be able to support each other, to be able to share best practice, and to be able to provide specific support when the majority of us were sitting in conversations that were quite disruptive. And it gets very difficult to navigate these disruptive conversations by yourself. And you add to that the female energy, you add to that, our cultural context, and it required a particular synergy of being able to communicate together and then support each other in strategizing how we can navigate the challenges that we're facing. And so Tipu Oranga Whenua is premised, or the foundation of our coming together was from these discussions. Roll forward a year, we quickly agreed to legally formalise because there were resources we couldn't tap into as individuals that were trying to come together with a common purpose or kaupapa. So we formalised as a charitable entity, and then we started providing some structure. And this has been in the last year. We were fortunate to have secured an ongoing partnership with our Crown Research Institute partner, and that has solidified the foundation of work that we've been able to navigate with our membership. And again, a membership is purposely kept small so that we can ensure that everybody benefits from the resources that we've been able to collectivise, be it, our koe Hini Wirangi Kohe Morgan, who's based here in Hamilton, who provides a koe lens for us, keeping us focused and feeding our energies with the wairua that she has, with the spirit that she has, is this beautiful koe. And so to, the really practical resources of a budget and then the science and academics that we've created relationships with, whom we recommend, because there are certainly those, and we all have it, regardless of our context. There are those that we won't work with again, and there are those that we embrace and recommend and sharing with others. So that's been the last year for Te Pū Oranga Whenua. Our membership is an eclectic or a diverse range of organisations. The commonality, aside from being wāini Māori leaders in our stories, is we all have a relationship with Papa Tuanuku. We all come from our mātauranga, te ao Māori lens. And so we have an organisation in the Hamilton area who specialises in regenerative beef farming or biological farming. We have our organisation who specialises in using a rongoa species plant for the basis of their skincare products. We have an iwi who have a responsibility to a vast number of shareholders on the east coast of Hawke's Bay. And so they're into aquaculture, farming, forestry, quite a diverse range just within their ecosystem as an iwi. We have our forestry whānau along the Wanganui River, who are asking the question how we can transform from leasing our lands to pine forestry. The fact that our lease is up in 50 years and we don't want to continue that because we've seen the damage to our whenua, we've seen the damage of the slash that's run into Te Awa Tupua. So what does our land use look like post-pine harvesting? What does that look like? And we've only got 50 years to address that because there's a healing process. And then there's identifying, we still need something that will provide a commercial return because we may not have the rental lease anymore. So we still have the kaumātua grants, the education grants, the health grants. How do we sustain those? So they're big discussions, and not just for, a finite group of beneficiaries. The learning is quite expensive, and those involved is quite expensive. I don't think I've missed anyone out. So rongoa, farming, horticulture, those who have just secured their Māori lands, then are collectivising their Māori lands and now asking what can they utilise their lands for in order to generate benefit from it while maintaining their role as kaitiaki and ensuring that whenua, that awa, that moana is left as pristine as possible, which sadly isn't consistent or common enough. Yeah, like I'm going on now. It's a bit of
that was amazing. Thank you for that description. It's those are some huge questions that you're asking and taking on. So good on you. And gathering as a collective that you can share resources and share learnings is just so effective, and it is the way that we can move forward by helping one another. Yeah, I just wonder what does that look like now? You had your original 2-day gathering, and I absolutely agree with you. There is a specific benefit beyond just having these people in the room, but there's an energy that you exchange, and you can get to know people in a deeper way than. But it is, obviously, it's amazing that we can connect digitally like this. But so, what does that look like in the years going? Do you meet every so often, or do you have a WhatsApp group that you share stuff with, or what's the means?
We're wahine. We want to get on the phone, or so the commitment is connecting monthly. As much, again, we're all time poor, but when you start creating reason and purpose, right, you'll rock up for that half hour or that hour. So a regular connection virtually is what we consistently aim for, but then also scheduling in advance the year. Okay, each quarter we're going to come together physically, and it may only be 2 days. And part of that, the majority of that time is just, hugging and sharing and talking about our kids and partners and family stuff, where, and it's any mama, regardless of her culture, can struggle with the guilt, the time poor, being the partner, being the mama, being the person in business, and those responsibilities can become overwhelming. So we factor that in when we create opportunities to come together and just be, maybe drink great wine or green tea. But we focus a lot on us as individuals, as people, and then provide a safe platform to unpack, the challenges that each of our organisations are facing. And more often than not, those conversations are sitting in spaces of disruption. The system, the way it is today, isn't serving our whenua. It isn't serving our people. So what does a redesigned system look like? And then we start contributing to these. And part of that story, which we've touched on, is the Takitoa meat processing story and food sovereignty. And so we meet, it's always important to meet regularly, but not just virtually. Now that we're colour coding to the space where we can come together, we have a commitment, and we've made a commitment to bring our wahine together as often as possible. Acknowledging, if the kids need to come, bring the kids. And if you need to bring your partner, bring your partner. Because you got to navigate these things, right? And and consider that when we're here fully. And it's difficult to be there fully when you're worried about the kids, or if somebody remembered to hang out the washing, and they're very real conversations we have. A little bit different when boys get together, I would suspect, maybe.
That sounds incredible, and a great service for you and the wahine that are collected, and I'm very sure that there'll be some amazing things stem from it. You mentioned Takitoa, and you said about this also so this is your organisation within the collective, correct?
Yeah. So Takitoa is another formal member, which morphed out of some research work we were investigating on behalf of iwi, who asked the question, how do we get our beef from our iwi farm gates to our whānau plates, to our beneficiaries' plates, to our landowners' plates? At the minute, it's got to go onto a truck, it's got to go to a meat processing plant, and then it's got to go to a supermarket before it can get to us. At which point, nobody has control of the land. The beef farmer doesn't have any control of that system at all. And just to clarify again, I am not a farmer. It's not my background. Thankfully, my partner in crime, Tracy Bayliss, and I sort of were in the investigation, and Trace, it sits in biological farming and regenerative farming, and has exceptional experience in looking to deliver an alternative meat story to consumers at an affordable rate, quality, nutritious meats. So she sits strongly in that, and I've learned so much from her in a consequent network of people who also have that same intention, is to provide good, quality, affordable, nutritious meat from our New Zealand land farms, from Papatūānuku. One would think, where I've landed after a year is, why would you be a farmer? It's an incredibly difficult space to be in, and I really get that. I take my hat off to our farmers, be it horticulture or agriculture, beef farming, lamb farming, deer farming. It's an incredible space to sit in. So just as a sidebar, I take my hat off to you. The learning with Takitoa, and our intention was about supporting the smaller farm systems in being sustainably viable. For me, it was about ensuring that my grandchildren, because we love our meat, spud and veg, I wanted to ensure that my grandkids were getting good food, because our food is putty. It's not healthy. And that correlates to the health statistics that are coming out. There's my whānau up the river. There is a high representation of stomach and colon cancer. These are all correlated, right? It's not just here's a news entry. We'll just, there's going to be a thing with those people in that particular. There's a correlation between what we're putting into our bodies and the unwellness that it's generating. So I'm a little bit over the top about that space. So food sovereignty. where is our food coming from? How is it being produced? What are we doing to ensure that it's, as free from chemicals as possible? So I'm preaching to the converted here who sit in regenerative and organic farmings. But then again, how do we get from our iwi gate to our whānau plate? It's not straightforward unless you redesign the system. And so legislation has instigated the opportunity to go, well, maybe we could look at doing this. And these are as you're sitting in and investigating the mobile abattoir system. So there's a deregulation that's impacting the home kill industry, which has been quite I understand, a foundation of our agricultural sector, but not recognised or regulated in any way until the last couple of years. And so that in itself, this regulation, is having an impact on the home kill industry sector. Taki Toa is premised on quality, affordable, nutritious meals to our low-income families. It's about sustainable farm practices. You want nutritious. It's not about using NPK fertilizers. It's not about maximizing inputs of all this stuff that then translates into unwellness, into our bodies, into our tinana. So we've been investigating what alternative systems, because it's not just about building this thing, this widget to go out and, farm, process independent of the current processing meat industry system that we have. It's a whole infrastructure review. And so we're moving into the next phase of understanding what that could look like. And if it means redesigning, it means being innovative, if it means having to challenge status quo to move out of a system that does not serve us well, whether you're a farmer, certainly whether you're a consumer, but even from a commercial perspective, what does that look like when we decentralize and bring it back to our communities? It's an incredibly powerful story.
I absolutely agree. It's an incredibly powerful opportunity for New Zealand to change direction, because we've just been on this massive all-in on globalization train for so long, and globalization has brought us, cell phones and cool microphones and all this stuff, and we can just trade land for it as a country, simplifying that relationship. But we're chucking all our energy towards that means, as a sector, it seems, and not near enough on mobile abattoirs or how do we, feed ourselves first and not have to go through this incredibly complex supply chain, even for me to buy, a block of cheese that was grown down the road. It goes through so much. So that's really cool that you're working on that. Yeah. And So what does it look like? It would be an abattoir that you would set up, or is it more of a framework?
What we quickly understood was you couldn't operate in this deregulated space at the minute. And it is new, right? It's fairly new. But you don't have to. Where we've landed is appreciating that it's a holistic story. So the current regulation allows for, picture the home kill infrastructure, which, and apparently not everybody knows this, but which does not allow you to retail. So that beastie that is processed can only go to the owners of that beastie, can't go outside that influence of the owners.
It can't even be gifted, right?
Can't even be gifted. It is illegal to sell or give away meats that are processed from your farm to anybody outside of that. So that's a fact. I was like, wow, it's a little bit interesting because that's not how I understood it. Anyway, and so when you look at the regulation that now says if you operate under this particular licensing and risk management plan, you can then retail, sell outside of your farm system. And so when you consider the implication of that, again, I mentioned earlier, not just on the current industry of home kill, but when you look at the potential of that, appreciating it's still early days for regulation. there's not much action or activity in terms of this new regulation that allows for a mobile meat processing system as opposed to a static system that you have with our butchers, or smaller static slaughtering and processing, which is out there, and they have a particular licensing. This particular regulation allows for processing on farm. That's not entirely straightforward, because you still have to consider the process of waste management and scalability and operating in this mobile system. So the innovation conversations, just to unpack what a mobile system would look like, what it has to contain, and how that impacts in the physical space that it'll be moving to, and how you move it. And so these are all moving parts that need to be considered. But even the bio-waste is huge. It's a huge discussion, because the current system, again, is quite closed and monopolized. So when you're looking at how does each region cope with that, and I just want to mention what it keeps coming in and out before I forget it, is COVID showed us how at risk our rural communities are in terms of their ability to self-support, right? When your roads are washed away, when and I liken to my whānau up the Wanganui River again, when the roads between Wanganui and Raitahi are washed away, access route is limited. Do you imagine what that means, and it has meant, to our farms trying to get their beasties to this processing plant, like 5-7 hours away? And that's not taking into account the animal welfare that's impacted by the current system. Kind of digress, sorry. So Takitiko again, you have to look at every moving part to participate in this mobile system of meat processing.
These regulations, they were put in for a reason, I'm very sure. It's about like food safety, but I spoke with Joel Sellerton before the summit as well, and he's a real leader in this conversation globally. And he makes a very good point. Or for one, I asked him if he were, president for the day or king for the day, what would he change? And he said the first rule he would change would be to eradicate any regulation between food producer and consumer, and that the market would be regulated for safety by itself, and same in the same way that Airbnb or Uber are self-regulated markets. Yeah. So to be an Uber driver, you don't even have to take a test or nothing. They don't even have to see your car. You just have to, you just become one. And if you were a dangerous driver or a dodgy character, you'd very quickly be removed from that system. Yeah. So if someone's like making unsanitary meat, which would be hard even to do, because it would all be there would still be systems you'd have to go through. But the regulation currently makes it, very, very difficult to go about that. And I don't think it's well balanced by the risk.
Yeah, we're grown-ups, and as a consumer, we know what's good to feed our families and what's not. And that's the simplicity of it. So when we go to the corner grocery store, when we go to the corner butchers, which we did in my grandmother's time, my great-grandmother's time, right? There was none of this layer and layer of regulation. I'm a fan. I want to talk to that guy, Joel. He sounds cool.
Yeah, he's cool. He's cool. Yeah. So what else would happen then if we were to redirect to feeding whānau first and feeding New Zealand first and feeding low income classes first? We've got to get this mobile meat packers set up, and then is there a distribution that comes with this? Is this a sort of bio-regional thing that gets established? Like how else do we increase that food sovereignty?
Yes, and yes. And I think what's exciting about this korero is there's no fixture, and it is regionally based, right? And I can't speak for others. I know there are those in the current home cool industry space that are having to look and redefine their operations because the future is looking a little bit bleak the way this regulation is happening. But for Taki Toa, the motivation is simple, the intention is simple, but the investigation that we're having is influenced by still being kaitiaki, ensuring the guardianship of the lands and the beasties. There's no one size that fits all, I would suspect. But what we're appreciating is redefining the economic growth at a regional level. The supply chain and the consumer segments and the distribution and the value chain, they're all parts that need to be considered when you're developing your place. And some may choose to, if you're getting into this mobile system, may just choose to be one part of that. Taki Toa is sitting in that whole value and supply chain story with the opportunity to share our learnings once we've kind of nailed it. And when I say nailed it, it's like a few years in the making. It took years to establish the current system we have. It's likely going to take years to kind of contradict that and redefine a new system. But also noting that our interest is in domestic, which is where our korero, our whakaaro, our thought of feeding whānau first springs from. Why do all the good stuff go overseas? Why are the prime cuts and the best grapes and the best apples go overseas and not feed our own people first? I find that a little bit staggering. And so when we talk about feeding our whānau first, we're not interested in exporting. We have enough to contend with in our own backyards and making sure our children are well fed regularly, good food. And so feeding our whānau first expands from that. So our Taki Toa story is about, and it's about local growth, local economic viable growth, controlled by those that are part of the story, not by a select few. I'm on my soapbox now.
Yeah, well, I absolutely resonate with what you're saying. It was a big part of the theme in the summit, and we talked to Angela Clifford from Eat New Zealand, who's really ingrained in this national food story and how do we change that up. So thank you for adding your voice to that. So you've talked about kaitiaki tanga, and Maori view land use from this stewardship basis, whereas right now, as farmers, we're very much in an ownership basis. And I just wondered if you could pull those two apart.
I don't want to get stuff thrown at me, Zeb. Again, I don't speak on behalf of farmers, but those that I have met, in the farm, Tracy's family farm here in Raglan, I'm talking to Grandad who farms biologically. The languaging and the understanding is the same, right? We have our own cultural language as kaitiaki, but so do those farmers who practice regenerative and biological farming. It is about the care of the land and the care of their waters, if they have an aquifer system that runs through their farming. It is about the beastie well-being and the struggles that I get that, you still got a mortgage to pay. You still have to be pragmatic in raising beasties and meeting that monthly mortgage commitment. You still have to put food on the table. It's the question you ask about how we maintain our commitment as kaitiaki, as guardians of the land, of our natural resources, of our environmental state, is everybody's consideration. Māori have a vested interest as the originators, as tangata whenua. It's embedded in our DNA, so to speak. I would suspect it's not that far different from, not that I know a lot of non-Māori farmers, and you would know, right, the conversations you and I have had. I would suspect there are similarities in ensuring, the impact of intensified farming, the impact of artificial chemicals, the impact potentially of genetic modification in the context they sit in, to grow grass bigger, stronger, better, to ensure that beasties rock out with the superhuman, super beastie DNA traits that sell more meat, and it's really being clear about where your values-based sits. And well, it does for us. It does with Takitoa. We are guided strongly by a value system. As kaitiaki, the whanaungatanga, the manaakitanga, these are values-based systems that influence and not driven by profit margins solely. Don't get me wrong, you still have to pay the bills, still have to put food on the table, but not an imbalance where profit supersedes, doing the right thing so that our grandchildren don't have to clean up our mess. That's simple.
Yeah, there certainly is a balance that we can and should aspire towards more, find between stewardship and caretaking of the whenua and also making an income and producing food for our community and for the world. We do have that opportunity here. So I guess is there any other ways that Te Ao Māori could help influence us as producers if we were to have more understanding of Mātauranga Māori or just the Māori worldview? Is there a way that knowledge could help us as producers become, lead a healthier land and future for next generations?
Of course, absolutely. And there's a reciprocity in that question set. That you ask the really hairy questions, eh? Yeah, I feel like putting up a disclaimer. The short answer is of course. And it's not even just in the practicalities of how can we raise healthy beasties in this little, 1 hectare block or something like that. It's more fundamental. I suggest it's more fundamental in creating relationship, between our Western farmers, our non-Māori farmers, and those who, within Māoridom, who are committed to ensuring the preservation of our whenua, of our land, and of our waters. So to have this conversation starts with a kinship. It starts with whakawhanaungatanga and creating relationship so that we can share what works. And I guess Trace and I are a beautiful example of that. Trace with her, Western farming, and me from my Māoridom farming, not farming, just Māoridom is, it's what you're doing. What does that mean? Why would you do that? It's not a straightforward answer, and it shouldn't be, because it's such a big, messy, eclectic, range of energies. I think we fall on our sword when we don't quite nail that purpose statement or that really clear, articulated answer. Because I'd be a bit dubious if somebody says, in response to your questions, there it is. I don't have that answer, other than I do believe it starts with sharing relationship. It's not about getting in a consultant or an advisor overlooking your land, because you underestimate, I would suspect, farmers who know their lands. It's about their willingness to farm well. It's about their willingness to put today's needs ahead of profit or commercialization or corporate greed. And so it starts with relationship and intention. But there are certainly learnings from a cultural perspective that would add value. The type of species you grow, instead of planting in pines, for goodness sake, have a conversation about pines, have a session on pines. See if I'd be really keen to jump in on that at some point. But, planting natives and naturals, planting species that are endemic to this area. And our knowledge-based systems, our mātauranga, premised on the stories that have been handed down, the karakia and prayers, all hold cautionary tales. They all hold, this is how you grow and sustain the iwi by these practices. It's all embedded in our stories, in our songs, and in our prayers even. which is more than a simple statement. It's a relationship.
Yeah. And I know you're not speaking for all Māori, but that was a beautiful answer. Thank you for that. It does come from our relationships, and when we see these support groups of farmers helping one another and sharing their learnings, it's just advancing our effectiveness and our success rate really well. And
which is why I love your kaupapa, right? You're creating a platform to bring peoples together, to share and discuss and engage in a safe space with common energies. And that's incredibly powerful. Invest in that.
I think we're also bringing people together to help change the story you talked about. The purako, is that how to pronounce? The narrative.
Purako, the story.
Purako. Yeah. Because if we change the purako, if we define our purpose statement by something, because I feel like a little bit when we're in this economic system of currently, what we call Western farming, it's just so we're doing what we're doing to make more profit, and it really reduces it. Or why are you taking that action? So I can make more profit, and then it doesn't go to another why. So why is that? And I think if we refine that, the deeper we got, we'd start to realize, actually, I care probably more about taking an action that restores the ecosystem more than the profit. If we gave ourselves the time to ask those questions and explore the answers even deeper.
Yeah, I know. I mean, there are those farming systems that are established, and quite rightly so, for industrial purposes. But is that the majority of our New Zealand farm systems, our agribusiness? I'm not sure. I would suspect there's enough of our smaller independent farm systems that are there for the love of farming and are intergenerational, right? And want to pass it. So yeah, there's a place and space for that industrialized approach, but is that the majority of our New Zealand farm systems? And when we look at the issues that are happening with our land, I suspect not. We shouldn't be.
Yeah, there's a balance, right? A balance we can be sought. I want to be conscious of your time, but I do. When we spoke first, you told me about the Wanganui River being given legal status.
Yeah.
Could you just elaborate on that and what that means?
I should be able to. So Te Awa Tupua and the Uruweras in the lands of Tūhoe on the east coast have, and it was led by Wanganui peoples, to give legal status or legal entity to our Wanganui River, or Te Awa Tupua, to ensure its protection, rights and interests. And so a legal precedence was set by the people of Wanganui, and by precedence I mean internationally, to give status or legal status to a non-human entity. It's never been done before. And it took a number of years post-settlement for this to happen for Wanganui. And what it did was set a precedence to acknowledge the taonga, or the treasures, the sacred treasures or taonga that we have, be it our waters, be it our forest, our lands, our natives, our mountains. They all have cultural significance, these landmarks. But the rights and the ability to protect their rights and interests in maintaining their health and well-being is severely curbed by the commercial and regulatory constraints that sit in some of these spaces of environmental Department of Conservation. And certainly the lack of ability to be kaitiaki as landowners, as tangata whenua of the whenua. So it's our role, it's our commitment to look after our river, right, Te Awa Tupua. But when you're constrained by local council, regional council, Crown, Department of Conservation, everybody in that Crown space wants a piece of the pie. it's very difficult to sustain with integrity the intention of that taonga. And so the legal status of Te Awa Tupua navigated that by giving Te Awa Tupua a legal entity, meaning there are two guardians, there are two po that have the say. If you want to do anything, if you want to take or if you want to use the river in a way that may be detrimental, you have to go through a process of seeking permission. Not to be confused with the place that there's any sort of ownership. It's not an ownership model. It's a guardianship model that has been provided in this legal precedence. That makes sense? There's some great, if you go on to Ngā Tangata Tiaki, the legal entity, iwi entity of Whanganui, that are responsible for the health and well-being of Te Awa Tupua. There's some very good literature online that you'll be able to find, and the very cool history and story as to how it unfolded, and the intentions. They're publicly accessible documents.
It's amazing. Yeah, I think part of what the issue is we don't view our trees and our waterways and our animals as sacred or as tapu. We view them as noa, and a movement like this to give a voice to the river on par with humanity. It's amazing. It's an awesome step in redirecting that pūriko.
Very cool.
Well, Lisa, it's been amazing to connect with you, and thank you for your wisdom, passing that to me and to the audience listening.
It's a different platform to talk unscripted so publicly. But thanks again, Zeb. I do look forward to future korero with you and your circle of influence. I look forward to catching up. For those of you that are taking the time to listen to my rambles, feel free to connect. Always up to have a cool korero and share as much as we can and what we do and how we do it.
And yeah, we'll be in touch on very sure, Lisa, because we just line up so much between agribusiness collectives and wanting to process the food that we're producing and distribute it locally. So look forward to those conversations, and I hope you have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you so much. Bye, Torai, everyone. Have a cool day.
Kite.
Bye.